Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. And as of this week, we finally get access to the War Within Alpha, with this most recent alpha build featuring plenty of class changes for us to take a look at over the next few weeks. This most recent alpha build also features the Earthern, the brand new allied race being added into the next expansion, but also the brand new zone of the Ringing Deep, which brings in 2 dungeons and 1 more delve for us to dive into. Technically, you should be able to find 2 delves in the Ringing Deep, although as of right now, one of them is inaccessible. This build also features higher level character templates, brand new animations for crowd control effects, but also plenty of hero talent changes for a number of playstyles. As part of our continued alpha coverage, I want to take a look at one of the classes that's receiving a massive amount of updates with a brand new talent revamp coming to the class of Warlock, specifically for the Spec of Affliction. But right before we get into more alpha content, most of you guys watching these kind of update videos are still not subscribed. However, the more of you remind, the more of you do. So let's keep it going. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell if you're watching these videos anyway. Especially if you want to get more regular content regarding Dragonflight patch 10.26, 10.7, Season 4, or any of the future War Within updates. Starting off, we have the Warlock class talent tree, which is going through a number of changes. Some of the goals of this particular build is hoping to accomplish is to ensure that each of the Warlock's capstones remains an interesting and an exciting choice, but also this means they're going to be a little bit more even with each other, mostly focusing on utility. They also want to reduce some of the throughput talents from the class tree, but instead convert them into the spec specific talent tree instead, while also making certain talents a little bit cheaper to pick up. Some of the most important things you'll see removed are going to be Grimoire of Synergy, Inquisitor's Gaze, as well as the Summon Soulkeeper capstone choices and Profane Bargain, with Soul Conduit, Fiendish Stride, and Felpack becoming a little bit cheaper to talent into. New talents such as Pact of Gluttony allows Hellstones to become Demonic Hellstones, which makes them function kind of like health pots instead of the normal Hellstone, where normally once you're in combat you use a Hellstone, you won't have that Hellstone go on cooldown for you to use again until you exit combat. These Hellstones, for Warlock specifically, will just go on cooldown and will be usable 1 minute later, kind of like you would be able to do with a normal potion. The talent of Swift Artifice reduces the cast time of Soulstone and Create Hellstone by 50%, which is a nice bit of convenience, but also you gain Demonic Tactics, increasing crit and melee spell crit of you and your demon by a set number. As for the Affliction specific talent tree, you'll notice that Malefic Rapture becomes a baseline ability, which is now replaced with UA as the very first skill that you pick up within your spec tree. And the rest of the talent tree, while it looks like it retains mostly a similar shape as it does in Dragonflight, the actual talents within have been adjusted or replaced entirely. One of the first changes is going to be the choice node between Absolute Corruption and Siphon Life. Both of these talents now empower corruption, one by 15% making it a permadot, the other by 20% while also causing corruption to heal for a portion of its damage, removing Siphon Life as an ability in order to simplify the Affliction Warlock rotation. Further down we have a little bit more cleave in AoE with a Volatile Agony. Refreshing Agony within 10 seconds or less, which you're going to be doing during pandemic windows if ever possible, would just cause the enemy to erupt doing shadow damage to everybody within 10 yards. Further down we have new talents such as Empowered Unstable Affliction, reduces the cast time of UA, making it a little bit easier to land, and the damage of UA also has a chance to generate you soul shards. We have a couple of these talents that actually play with resources, only a handful of them, like Relinquish, which gives Agony a slightly higher chance to generate soul shards also. Further here we have buffs to Malefic Rapture, with Malefic Rapture damage increased, but also damage to corruption being increased. Then we have talent like Call the Weak. The more enemies Malefic Rapture hits, the harder it hits. And Malefic Rapture will be primary way that you will be doing any kind of damage to single target or AoE, as Seed of Corruption will no longer be your primary way to deal damage through AoE. It'll be mostly a payload to spread corruptions everywhere, but for the most part, Malefic Rapture will take over outside of any situations where you don't need to constantly redot your targets. For the next row, we have another choice node between the good old Drain Soul, but also Drain Soul generally being more competitive than Shadow Bolt. They wanted to find ways to make Shadow Bolt a little bit more lucrative to pick up. So we have improved Shadow Bolt, reduces the cast time of Shadow Bolt by 15% and increases damage by 40%. You have the execute benefits, but also the channel benefits and the convenience of how Drain Soul functions. But the improved Shadow Bolt, especially if you're looking for a more mobile Affliction Warlock build, I actually found that it's kind of sort of works, and there's a couple other talents that can tie into it. For example, if you want to have a cleave build, Cunning Cruelty ends up being kind of interesting, where Shadowbolt and Drain Soul have a chance to trigger Shadowbolt Volley, dealing extra shadow damage to 5 nearby enemies within 10 yards of your current target. And if you're getting constant resets on the Nightfall procs, for instance, and you're having to move while Shadowbolting, the amount of cleave damage you can do with it is really cool. And there's even some hero-specific talents like the Soul Harvester, where you can actually utilize getting Nightfalls and some value out of it. It's actually been kind of interesting to play around with. Further down, we have other talents like Sacrilash's Stride, buffing Corruption, causing curses to be amplified. We have Phantom Singularity, as well as Vile Taint. Further down, we have Malediction, increases the critical strike chance of Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction by 10%. And on the opposite side, we have critical strike damage with Contagion, buffing Agony, Corruption, and UA by 15% of crit damage, which might make Affliction Warlocks want to invest more into crit. Further down, just below Sacrilege, we have another choice node between Summoner's Embrace, which buffs the effectiveness of your spells and demons by 3%, or allows you to play Grimoire of Sacrifice, which gives you additional shadow damage. Then we do have some adjustments down towards the kind of right below the capstones, that the talents that kind of open up into your capstone choices, like Shadow's Embrace, which gives you a 16-second duration, making it a little bit easier for you to maintain this debuff across multiple enemies, stacking up to 4 times. Further down, it goes into Withering Bolt. Shadowbolt and Drain Soul deal additional damage for every single dot, up to 45% more damage, which when combined together with improved Shadowbolt, it does give your bolts a bit more of a punchy feel. Then it goes into a new capstone, which is actually a PvP talent brought into the Spec tree called Oblivion. 45-second cooldown, 2 soul shards, unleash a wicked magic upon your target. You will deal additional damage for every damage over time effect you have on that target. But it's an interesting talent that does a huge bulk of damage, and compared to everything else that we have in terms of tooltips and in terms of overall output, it is one of the burstier talents that's available. 45-second cooldown will make it a little weird. It doesn't quite line up with some of the other talents like Soul Rod, for example, which is a minute CD, but there might be some interesting combinations where you get a bit of burst, though no cleave aspects will be available for this talent. Then we have the Dark Glare, exactly the same Dark Glare as before, but his upgrade talent is a little different, with Malevolent Visionary buffing the damage of Dark Glare by 70%, making him a bit more of a potent cooldown. And while Dark Glare extends damage over time effects on targets, it also sears the target for 97,000 shadow damage. And I guess the only question is, he does sear multiple targets at once, so it gives him a little bit extra of a burst. I do like the single target damage increase, some cleave capability. This allows the talent to do well in pure single target, but also in a little bit of cleave and AoE, especially for targets that are very short-lived. Could make the Dark Glare a little bit burstier. Further down, we have Death's Embrace, where Drain Life healing is being increased by 30% since all of the Drain Life talents have been removed out of the class tree. They've been reworked here. With Death's Embrace, Drain Life is more effective when you're low health. Damage done by your Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction and Malefic Rapture is also increased by 5% when your target is at or below 20% health, which leans into more of this executing mechanic that Affliction Warlocks can sometimes lean into, and that's like the really first talent that makes those dots a little bit more effective in that regard. Now, this is just the very first version of the Affliction talent tree, but so far what they plan to do for the War Within for Affliction specifically is to, 1, inject more throughput talents into their talent tree, since a lot of those throughput options are now gone in the class tree. They also want to help reduce button complexity of Affliction by removing abilities such as Siphon Life, but also giving a lot of your talents a little bit of that cleave, but also single target value, so you have a little bit more flexibility in how you customize your Warlock. Also, they're gonna put Malefic Rapture as the forefront ability, your primary soul shard spender, to be your primary damage choice in both single target as well as multi-target situations. Yes, that does mean that Malefic Rapture is still going to be a core ability of the Affliction Warlock going forward into this expansion. And depending on what kind of Warlock player you are, you're either happy about this news or you're not. See, the Warlock community is a bit split regarding Malefic Rapture. Some players love that Affliction has effects that interact with your dots, how Malefic Rapture is empowered with damage over time effects, and how it gives Affliction a little bit more burst. But others would love for Affliction to just go back to the good old days when Affy was primarily a damage over time class that weaved afflictions, corruptions, agonies, and other dots as part of a maintenance playstyle, where you didn't necessarily have a burst window, but instead you were focused on constant pressure, where managing your dots and refreshing them effectively was the core of your overall gameplay. While we are still in a fairly early alpha war within, it does seem that the talents, but also hero talents, actually open up two opportunities for Affliction for both of those Malefic Rapture and dot-based gameplay to shine within this expansion. Taking a closer look at the Affliction hero specs, which by no means am I an expert in, we have the Hellcaller and the Soul Harvester. I wanted to try to find a way to incorporate these hero specs to create two different Affliction Warlock builds, to see if it's possible to create a playstyle that satisfies both parts of the Affliction Warlock community. The first one will be a dot interaction build, which amps up abilities such as Drain Soul, Shadow Bolt, and most importantly Malefic Rapture. Combining Soul Harvester for that build was the easiest choice, since you gain the ability of Demon Soul, which allows you to unleash damage alongside your Soul Shard spenders. This playstyle also combos well together with Nightfall procs, whether you play Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul. You're also able to force Nightfall procs using Haunt. Consuming Nightfall deals additional burst damage to the target, and consuming Nightfall can also proc Demonic Soul. Casting Soul Rot causes you to unleash the demon within with every single cast of Malefic Rapture for a short moment after casting Soul Rot, which allows Demonic Soul to really amp up those Malefic Rapture windows. This playstyle thematically allows Affliction to really heavily lean into burst damage, and depending on how you talent your character, a good portion of this burst damage could also be used while on the move. This playstyle leans into being able to augment your abilities using the dot effects, creating powerful new synergies instead of focusing on fully rotting your targets down. But then I wanted to try out a damage over time focused Warlock build to really dive into this original Affliction fantasy. And the best way to capitalize on dots is with the Hellcaller hero subspec, which focuses on corrupting your foes with Entropic Fel, which besides the flavor text in practice means that the hero talent changes your corruption, which normally does roughly 54,000 damage over 14 seconds, into a new effect called Wither, which deals 45,000 instant Shadow Flame damage and an additional 311,000 Shadow Flame damage over 18 seconds. If the tooltip is correct, and this is still alpha, this would mean that Wither, damage over time component, deals more damage than Agony or Unstable Affliction, while benefiting from all of the talents which empower corruption. Wither also gains additional stacks each time you consume soul shards. Each time that he deals damage, he has a chance to start consuming those stacks to deal even more Shadow Flame damage to every target that has Wither on it. While it's normally an RNG effect, it can be forced with the talent of Malevolence, which is the capstone for the Hellcaller subspec. Besides this, we also have talents such as Mark of Xavius, which increases Agony's damage over time, causing Agony to become a combo effect which can multi-cleave to multiple targets. Mark of Parathorn increases Agony's speed by 40%, which helps you generate more resources while also empowering the stacks of Wither damage. Overall, this creates a fast-paced playstyle where instead of buffing your Malefic Rapture, you will use Rapture to empower Wither with additional stacks. And you try to maintain high stacks of Wither before having to refresh all of your dots all over again, which is exactly what some of you would want to see out of Affliction, dot management, and dot refresh gameplay. This playstyle in particular, to me, felt really good to play with. It's usually not worth, especially in the early alpha, to write off a spec as it's overpowered or it's underpowered, because the numbers are still going to be an ever-shifting thing until the game finally releases, but this build so far has felt fantastic to play, at least in its early iteration. Every rare I came across in the open world was just melted by the dots of this Wither-style Warlock, and in dungeons the amount of damage you could put out, even while staying on the move, mostly focusing on refreshing your dots, was actually quite fantastic to play into. It's been a good while since I've really been excited about Affliction Warlock, but after checking out the Hellcaller together with this build specifically, this got me really excited for the future of Affliction Warlock, and definitely put this class in general on my radar going into the next expansion. Besides this, for Affliction Warlock, for either of the two builds, I found out that this spec is actually very resource intensive right now. The amount of resources you're generating on the alpha, which may just be an alpha thing, makes the Affliction spec feel super lively. Rotationally, it feels like there's always something to do. It doesn't feel like you have any long stretches of downtime where you're just waiting for cooldowns, as with this version, it feels like you're always trying to set up the next step, or you get a random proc of abilities that allows you to really unleash some serious damage and capitalize on a new window thanks to random buff generation. But yeah, for now that's going to be everything we got regarding Affliction Warlocks for War Within Alpha, at least when it comes to this most recent development build. And by no means is this video going to be my final thoughts on the Hellcaller or Soul Harvester. I'll probably have a separate video where I cover all of the Warlock as well as other class hero specs in much better detail and give you guys my final thoughts on what I like, what I don't like, and what I would hope changes going forward, because I've only recently got into the alpha. I need a little bit more time to play around with these, but this is everything so far regarding specifically Affliction, some of the spec specific changes, but also some of the possibilities that the spec could experience once the War Within officially launches. Super excited about the potential for a damage over time Affliction Warlock to make a big return for this expansion, and hopefully Blizzard will continue to fuel that damage over time gameplay going forward, as it is a very much beloved playstyle by many players in the Warlock community.